My name is Katie Crocombe, and I am founder and director of 5283. We provide marketing and PR services for event tech companies. I'm your host for today's sessions. Welcome. It gives me great pleasure to say that, day 2 of Event Tech Live. The event's expansion is a testament to the growth of the industry and the excellent work from the organisers. A huge, huge thank you to Adam Parry and the team for bringing us together. We're here to learn, to network, so please do ask questions. This is a safe environment. You can use questions. I'll be coming around with a mic, but you can also ask questions on our fantastic Glisser interactive app. So you just visit this on your internet browser, and you can ask questions, vote for questions, etc. It's fantastic and really easy to use, so please do. Other bits and pieces, thank you to our sponsor, D2I Systems, who have helped put us together this stage in the programme, and Matt, who's from D2I Systems, will be joining us for one of our panel discussions later. A huge congratulations to the winners of the Event Tech Awards last night. I think there's a few sore heads, so please bear with some of the exhibitors today. And I think that's everything. And all that leads me to say is have a great day, and thank you to our first speaker, Helen, for kicking off an important session. I think GDPR has been spoken about a lot this year, but now it's rocking and rolling. It's time to actually ask some of the gritty questions. So please do put your questions to Helen. I'd like to welcome Helen onto the stage, Hellen Beveridge.
Thank you. Gosh, the last time I was in front of a load of people with headphones on, I was at a 50th birthday silent disco, having drunk quite a lot of gin. I think maybe I need to drink quite a lot of gin this morning. So my name's Hellen Beveridge. I am the privacy lead at my own consultancy, which is Data Oversight. I am poacher turned gamekeeper because once upon a time I was an event marketing director. So for those of you who are in that particular frame, then that's still, I know where you're coming from. So I look at data privacy from an operational perspective. I do have one little bit of housekeeping, and that's for those of you who've never seen me present before. I am deaf, and that means that if you ask a question, you have to have the microphone, and I might have to ask you it 2 or 3 times. And I will just keep going, asking you to repeat yourself again and again and again until I can hear you. So do bear that in mind. Pretend I'm a toddler, and you've got to articulate to me quietly and slowly. So my presentation is going to be quite short. Because I would rather we answered your relevant questions, because there were still lots of myths and legends about with regard to GDPR. If you're in the privacy environment, which is what I'm in now, we don't really talk about GDPR anymore. We talk about DPA 2018, and we talk about the information security regulations, and we're also looking at regulations around the world. So. This is one of the things. I'm going to talk about 2 very relevant event-based things. One of them is about the Ticketmaster breach. So there are still people who I talk to within the event industry who never heard of it. And the timeline, I'm not exact, it's not absolutely exact, but in approximately April of this year, March, April, an online bank told Ticketmaster that they thought they were losing credit card details of their users. The bank was Monzo, and what Monzo identified was that of the credit card fraud that was happening with their users, 80% of the transactions of the fraudulent cards, the individual also had a transaction with Ticketmaster, which raised a red flag for them, because only 0.8% of all of their transactions were with Ticketmaster. So they flagged it with Ticketmaster, and Ticketmaster said, no, it's not us. So we need to keep an idea of the dates. This was in March 2018, so very relevant. In April 2018, some New Zealand soft hackers, actually published on the Ticketmaster Twitter feed the line of code that was stealing the credit card details. And Ticketmaster still did nothing about it. It took until June 2018 for Ticketmaster to fess up that something had been going on, and they'd lost the credit card details of 40,000 users. Now, the dates are really important because in March 2018, they would have been prosecuted under DPA 1998, the maximum fine of which is €500,000. In June 2018, they'll be prosecuted under DPA 2018, which is 4% or €20 million. I'm sure that in Ticketmaster's world, they are desperately lobbying to be prosecuted under DPA 1998, but in my world, we desperately want the company, to be prosecuted under 2018 because they knew about it. What it actually was a chatbot that was created by a third party for Ticketmaster. Perfectly okay, but chatbots are notoriously insecure. It was never intended to be put on the payment page of the Ticketmaster site. If it had been put anywhere else on the website, the security issues would have been much lower, but someone decided to push it on the payment page, which enabled them to scrape credit card details of everybody who had a transaction. What will make it worse for Ticketmaster is the ticket web is part of Ticketmaster, and you probably can't see the date of that, but it's 2012. The same thing happened to them in 2012. So they had 6 years to sort out their security, and they haven't done it. So things are not looking quite so good. This is from a solicitor's website. So this is an ambulance-chasing solicitor who is now trying to collect the names and details of some of those 40,000 users who lost their credit card details in order to bring a class action against Ticketmaster. So not only do they have this issue that they may well be facing a big fine from the regulator, but they may also be going through the civil courts in order to fight this particular claim. From a GDPR data protection perspective, the thing that we're really focused on is something called privacy by design. And what lots of people have focused on with what they perceive to be a tick box exercise with GDPR is they've focused on, have I got my consent box? All of the big fines that have happened in the last 2 weeks have had nothing to do with consent. They're all been to do with security breach. So the breach at Heathrow Airport was a security breach. So from my perspective, what I do what I spend most of my time doing is trying to get the organisations and the companies we work with to really think most about privacy by design. And what that means is that we do not lie, we do not harm, and we follow what's known as the fair information practices, which is to collect as little as possible for as short a time as possible and only for the purpose that we want it. So I have an organisation that's doing an event next week. They're collecting data for a specific thing at the event. The instruction to the data processor is that all the data is deleted the following day. They have no use for it the following day. And the work that I've done with lots and lots of event companies has shown that a large proportion are still using Excel spreadsheets, which is just horrific. I've had a data breach this week caused by an Excel spreadsheet. By allowing naive flow of data, and that's what we're trying to stop. I did say to Katie that sometimes I feel like the dementor in the room sucking out all of the joy. But in the teams that I've now been working with for 9-10 months, they now come and talk to me before they start doing things, because more often than not, we find more elegant solutions for the things they want to do, rather than saying no. I very rarely say no. But in all of the organisations I'm working with, we're trying really hard to stop this. Wired magazine described the Ticketmaster breach as a perfect failure of communications, as well as a perfect failure of IT. So I work in lots of organisations where people sit in silos, they just don't talk to one another, where marketing has had no input in the registration form and therefore the permissions are not correct, where the data team have had no input on the registration form, and therefore they can't actually put the data into the fields that they want when they've actually collected the information. The next little thing to talk about is the Tory Party conference. So, has anybody here not heard about what happened at the Tory Party conference? Anybody not heard? Okay, so the Tory Party, like most event organisers, had an app. for their event, and that app was to enable communication between delegates, also so that you can fire out things telling what sessions are on, who's speaking. Unfortunately, the way in which you gained access to this app and to your own profile was to type in your email address. So it was one-factor email address. So anybody who could guess somebody's email address was able to get into that person's account, which meant that Boris Johnson suddenly became a porn queen. Lots of government ministers had their job titles changed, but also somebody was going through shredding people's personal mobile phone numbers. So there's been quite a lot of commentary about this. And in fact, there was an article in Conference News about it this week. So where it was described as a glitch. There was no glitch. The event app performed as it was supposed to perform. The glitch was the person in the Conservative Party's event organisation team who actually bought and specified this app didn't necessarily know about privacy by design and didn't necessarily know what the potential security flaws were. Because if somebody with privacy governance had been involved, they would have asked, what is your two-step authentication? They would have done their risk assessment of the data collection mechanisms. Because two-factor authentication would have saved that from happening. It also means that the app itself was not following privacy by design principles. Just a little bit of background, privacy by design was actually invented by the Canadians, and as you know, we're run by Canadians these days. The GDPR is the first legislation to put it actually on the statute books. So you can be prosecuted for not following privacy by design. And the Conservative Party will be prosecuted for this particular breach because they failed to protect the security of the users of this app because they didn't follow privacy by design principles. This is, it was a lovely infographic from Events Force, which was published pre-GDPR. And it says 2 in 3 event planners don't understand. I would actually think it's actually more closer to 2.5, and I would still say that most people don't. It took me 18 months to work out from beginning to end what the GDPR meant. And every time I meet with privacy lawyers and you ask them a question, they say, it depends. Because how GDPR and how data protection is put into every business differs for every single business. So when you see people saying 5 easy steps or 7 easy steps to GDPR, I can tell you that the event organisers that I'm working with, my key client has 1 event a year, and our compliance documentation now goes to 3 lever arch files. Because they collect data in so many places, and as we do discovery, we keep finding more data in more places and more processes, and they actually can't tell you what they do. And in one organisation, they had 180 suppliers, and we could only find contracts and terms and conditions for 10 of them, because there was no corporate legacy of the documentation. So, and the GDPR is huge. And then, of course, there's the DPA 2018, and also, there is legislation all around the world that you have to comply with. So if you're doing events in Japan or Russia or Brazil or anywhere else, you have to follow their data protection laws. And just to say, anybody who is doing anything in the Philippines, don't ever volunteer to be a data protection officer in the Philippines, because it's a custodial sentence for a mandatory custodial sentence for a data breach. And I don't know about you, but I don't ever want to spend any time at all in a Filipino jail. So I'm not doing that for anybody. Very interesting about who was responsible for getting your events ready for GDPR. We do use the poacher and gamekeeper phrase a lot because data protection is about governance. And you can't put governance into something if you have a vested interest in the decision. So a marketeer cannot put governance into a database that deals with marketing data. An IT person manager, team, cannot put governance into IT systems that they specify, buy and control. So schools have had this problem where they have to appoint a DPO, and they've had to try and find somebody within the organisation who does not have a vested interest in the data itself. So for those 50% who've got a data protection officer, I would also ask those 50%, is your data protection officer somebody who only does data protection? Because more often than not, it'll be the company secretary, or it'll be, I've got one company where it's one of the accounts team. But if you want to understand data protection legislation, then you have to be embedded in data protection legislation, because the amount of guidance that comes out, my phone goes probably about every 15 minutes with new information about things that are happening in new case law. The operations team, I'm really intrigued by the companies that are using their operations team to manage their data protection, because in all of the events companies that I've ever worked in, data is the operations team's least concern. They're very good at risk management because they have to do it as part of their job role, and they really understand risk assessment and risk management. But data is something completely different. I like external consultant. And other, who are these other people that are dealing with GDPR? I'm really glad that creating awareness internally is at the top, because in all of the training that we do, the biggest thing that you can use to mitigate risk in your business is if people understand what they can and can't, should and shouldn't be doing, or if they know what they don't know. Because if you know what you don't know, you know that you've got to go and ask somebody a question to find out what you should be doing. More issues are caused by the blind leading the blind than by anything else. I have had a situation where someone called up to me and said, I can't send this data to this person. And I said, but why not? It's their data. And they said, well, I asked Bob, and Bob said I couldn't. And I said, but Bob knows nothing. Why did you ask Bob and then come and ask me second? And so you need to know what you don't know. Preparing for a data breach, well, you can only prepare for a data breach if you know where your data is. Running a data audit as well, anybody here who hasn't already done a data audit, you can't protect what you don't know you have got. Also, you can't get rid of what you don't know you haven't got or have got. And you also can't work out who potentially is your single point of failure, because if you don't know who's using the data and where it is and where it's going and who handles it and how is it protected, then you can't work out who's likely to lose it or abuse it. So, given what I've just said about the Conservative Party's details, then it's quite interesting that most people say they know what the systems are doing. I would argue that in lots of cases, most people don't understand the complexities and the technicalities of the systems, and therefore they can't possibly understand whether it's GDPR compliant or not. I'm going to stop because I know Katie's got questions and you've probably got questions, and I don't want to run out of time. So
yes, we've just before we go to the Glister questions, I have a question based on a session we did yesterday. For anyone who was with us yesterday, there was a session on event registration and collecting visitor data, and how it's not a great experience, and you collect all this data and we don't do anything with it. Is the simple answer for GDPR terms just not to ask the questions? Is that too simplistic?
Do you mean from the organiser or from the stand?
From the organiser perspective, when we ask people to register for the shows, we often put them through very long forms with lots of data. Would it be better, generally for GDPR-wise, if we kept our forms shorter, collected less data, and just kept it all a bit simpler?
So if I put my marketing hat back on, I hate them, absolutely hate asking demographic questions, because you have to ask yourself, you have to have a purpose for asking those questions, and you have to be able to define that purpose. And also, if you're using those questions to profile the individuals, you have to ask their permission. So who wants to add that extra step in if you're not going to use the data? Similarly, if you're going to use that kind of data for profiling, the retention period is lower or your justification for keeping it is lower than your justification for keeping the name and address details. And we all talk about frictionless registration, and people are more likely to give you accurate information the less you ask them for. So I've had some props earlier. I had. If I was to offer you a lollipop or a chocolate bar, which would you choose?
Chocolate.
Is that a choice?
Yeah.
No. Because I've forced you to make that choice, because I've only given you two things to choose from.
Yes, yes.
So with consent, so where people have got consent boxes all over the place. Consent is only valid if I gave you a proper choice. And it's only worthwhile to the organiser if it was an appropriate question. So I would say ditch the demographics and work harder at engaging with your audience, because engagement will tell you more about what they want from an event than asking, because we all answer the first question of each box. If they're not valid, anyway.
Ditch them.
Yeah, ditch them.
So let's go to questions from the audience. What are your thoughts on facial recognition? Obviously,
Don't
we're a
do
tech
it.
show.
Okay, so facial recognition is the collection of biometric data for the purpose of uniquely identifying an individual. And you have to have explicit consent to do that, which means that you have to collect the data of the individual in order for them to say no, as well as for them to say yes. It also means you're then managing highly sensitive data, which pushes your risk profile up massively, which means that you will have to do a DPIA, you will have to do a critical assessment of the vendors, you will have to know exactly where that data is going. If you haven't got governance in your business, then absolutely don't do it. But it requires explicit consent, and the thing about consent is it can be withdrawn at any time. So if you are collecting facial recognition in a closed hall like this, you then have to identify the people who have withdrawn their consent. It also depends on the audience. In Western Europe, it's considered to be astonishingly creepy. So similarly, RFID, you have to be able to turn it off because it requires explicit consent.
Right, okay. I think the next one is there going to be a review of GDPR at some point in terms of checking implementation of the rules? Is there going to be a review of GDPR, do you think?
So you mean guidance. So as cases come out, then the guidance may change. For instance, at the moment, the guidance is really woolly. So if you want to know whether you have to have a data protection officer, I have clients who definitely fall into the camp of the type of data, but then it says on a large scale. And large scale in the guidance is defined as small scale is a doctor, one doctor and his practice. Large scale is a business managing 10,000 data subjects. That's a lot of ground in between. So the guidance will get tighter. Ironically, lots of the best guidance is coming out of France, from CNIL, which is CNIL. And so all of the data protection authorities will be bringing out more guidance. But the law itself will not change. It's embedded in UK law. So if that was a Brexit question, it isn't going to change with Brexit. Brexit is going to make life very difficult.
Right, okay. Do we have any questions from the floor at all, or should we just keep going through the Glisser questions? Are you guys using the Glisser app?
Can I answer this one about the guidelines? Okay, so
yes, yeah.
So there are lots of guidelines, but the main thing to work out is if you've done your data audit and you know what's happening in your business, you go and look for the guidelines that apply to you. Don't try and make the law fit your business. Make your business fit the law. So if there are things that in your business aren't working right, then it's an opportunity to try and change what you're up to. Those organisations that have tried to shoehorn the legislation and find guidance that we're finding the answer to the question that we want answered are the ones that where they keep tripping over. They can't make compliance.
Can I ask a question? I think from some people in the audience are going to be data managers for events companies, or certainly manage that sort of data. Has there been how do you manage that internally? Is there training needed for data managers who perhaps now need to be more internal client facing, so they're having to do more presentations? Are you finding people are bringing you in and experts in to help support that and drive that in the business?
So we do little boot camps and things like that, because there's masses of terminology used and lots of legal terminology used. about legislation. So we do get lots of teams to come in, and we have GDPR snakes and ladders and GDPR bingo and card games and things like that to try and get people engaged. We do 10-minute sessions with teams, and we bring different elements of different teams together, because often it doesn't matter how small an organisation is, everybody operates in silos. So it's really good to bring everybody together so that they can move the data forward. And in most cases, people are shedding their data load. It's making their life easier rather than more difficult.
One of the questions that I had was from her personal experience. I recently worked with a very large organiser who had a very strong data processing, and marketers weren't actually allowed to see the data.
Yeah.
As a result, they got halfway through the campaign to realise they'd been sending their email communications to the wrong data.
Yeah.
How can that be a better process? How can we manage that better and make sure it's most effective and that doesn't happen?
Yeah. So I suspect what's occurred is that there's been governance put into the business, and they've said, right, no one is going to be able to access the data, because the only way we can stop it going here, there and everywhere is for us to know exactly who is touching it. But it kind of went a little bit too far, because all they would have had to do would have shown an anonymised or pseudonymised, so the two things are different, a pseudonymised sample, and then to the marketing team, and they would have been able to identify that it was the wrong data selection. So you don't have to share all of the data, and I would advocate that teams do not see data. You do get nothing valuable from seeing 10,000 names, but there's a lot of value in being able to see a proportion of the information.
Or perhaps maybe the job titles and the company names.
Yeah.
And then you could at least know that they're the right target audience.
And just so you know, that's recognised as being pseudonymised data and not anonymous data, because a particular job title with a particular company might just be one person. You may well be able to identify them.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so you just have to be careful not to connect the two together. But internally, so you've reduced the risk, and the marketing team would have had an early insight into whether it was the correct data selection or not.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I think we've got some more time for a couple more questions. What are the watch-outs when working with third parties who collect and store data for you? Are you liable if there's a breach? I think it's a great question.
Right, okay, so third-party processor, you're absolutely liable. So you have to have a controller processor agreement in place. You have to be able to, you are responsible for their actions. So if it's a new supplier or it's a new third party that you're working with, you may well want to go and actually go to their office and see what they're doing. If they're fuzzy about their terms and conditions, or if they fight with you about signing contracts, then you may want to go elsewhere. The whole purpose of the GDPR was to make a systemic change, to make every actor in the process. If the processor, the third party, has acted fraudulently, you will have the ability to pass on any. If you have a monetary fine, you can pass it on, but you can't get back reputation, because with the Conservative Party, everybody knows it was the Conservative Party that had the problem. I can't remember the name of the app company, but the Conservative Party reputation is damaged, and they can't haul that back. So, basically, if there's a breach, the processor has to tell you and you have to report it, and you are the company that's named on the ICO website. And that's something really important to understand, is that the ICO always names and shames.
I think the thing I found quite interesting about the Conservative Party app was that the aim of the app was to make the conference look more cool and be more techie. And I just thought, actually, that's not a justification for implementing any tech anyway.
No, tech is lovely. I really, really like tech, you know, but we have to work. We have to start saying, not can we do something, but should we do it? And so I've been in conversation with lots of people about AI, and they're really, they love their geekiness. Saying that's brilliant, but should you be doing it? Should you let a genie out of the bottle? And they go, oh, we can't put this on. And so, well, if you're clever enough to create a robot that can jump over logs, you're clever enough to work out what data you shouldn't be collecting from somebody.
I think we just squeeze in one more question, if that's okay with you. I think if we go for, this is a good one. How do you ensure that event photography and videography, is GDPR compliant?
So it depends on your purpose for processing. So taking photographs in the general environment, there's not masses of problem. Where people do get into trouble is where they take photographs of people and then use it for marketing. So particularly children, and where they haven't necessarily worked out whether they are the data control of that data and whether they should or shouldn't be using it. Obviously, if you publish a photograph, you have to remember that somebody can ask you to take it down, and you should be able to take it down. So what we say is, if you're going to print it in a very high glossy brochure, book a model, because you don't have to withdraw it. But the event we're working with next week, they've got minors, and some of those minors, the parents don't want them in photographs. So the solution is they wear enormous lanyards that are bright pink. And so when the photographer takes pictures in the general environment, a photograph with somebody who's got a bright pink lanyard is not used, or their face is obscured, pixelated out.
That's a fantastic idea. It doesn't even take that much more cost or effort, really.
No,
That's a great idea. Well, thank you very much, Helen. I know that you've got lots of questions, so I think you'll be around for a little bit.
I'll be around. I've got cards.
I think you might be mobbed. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes for our next session. Thank you.